Hello, everyone.
Hi. Welcome.
Hello. Let me see, what do I want? Oh, there we go.
We're just going to wait a few minutes while people start joining the webinar, just so we have a good amount of folks watching.
Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a couple minutes.
Oh, yeah.
We have a bird as our background music today.
Noise in the background.
Welcome, everyone.
Zoom should have background music.
Gabby, should we get started? Oh, you're muted. Yes. Okay. All right. Let's get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm Skylar Larimore. I'm on the policy team within the mayor's office. Delighted to be here. Very appreciative of your interest in joining us in this adventure of We Will Chicago, the city's first citywide planning effort since the 1960s. And I'll introduce my colleague, Kathy Dickett, and pass it to her for a welcome.
Hello, everyone. Yes. Also, great to see so many people participating and interested in this initiative. And I'm in the Department of Planning and Development, Deputy Commissioner over Citywide Planning and Systems Planning. So we look forward to answering any of your questions after we do this 15-minute presentation.
Yeah, so we're going to share a lot of content for the next 20 minutes or so. If you have questions that come up throughout, please do drop them in the Q&A, and then we'll have ample time between now and the end of our program at 1 p.m. to answer all of your questions. We may not get through every single question because we know there's a lot of people on the line today. So if we see similar questions, we might group them to provide some shared answers. Looking forward to diving in, and we can go on to our next slide. All right, so why plan now? Really, you all know this, that's why you're here. This is a really critical moment for our city, tackling the dual pandemics of COVID-19 and structural racism that have been amplified by this crisis. And we can imagine that the map on the right-hand side has only gotten more stark as families and communities, particularly Black and Latinx communities, have been hard hit during this crisis. And we know that systems and policies have contributed to the maps as we see them today. So we need to interrogate and rethink those systems and policies in order to reverse this trend and create a more equitable city for the current and future residents of Chicago. So as the city is starting to reopen and the vaccine is enabling people to do things they had not considered for a whole year, what a critical time for us to think about how we can build a city that's more resilient in the face of future shocks and stressors in a way that truly centers justice and equity. In many major metropolitan areas all across the US, citywide plans are a very common practice. The fact that Chicago has not had one since the 1960s is frankly an anomaly. And honestly, we recognize that Past plans have not always served our communities and neighborhoods. Those plans have not always been participatory. Everyday residents have not had the opportunity to think about the future of Chicago that we want to build together. So what a rare moment for us to do that through this process. Next slide. So in 2020, the mayor's office with the Department of Planning and Development launched this 3-year citywide planning process. And in that year completed a pre-planning outreach process where we talked to over 250 Chicagoans from all across the city to shape a broad framework for the citywide plan that you see on the slide in front of you today. So the pillars, the principles at the top, these are really the North Star for our plan. So everything that we do, everything we develop for the citywide plan will be means tested against, is this advancing equity in the city? Is this advancing resiliency in the city? And we all know that we all come to those words with different definitions. So part of the process of We Will is to co-create those together. And then again, to make sure we're leveling back up to think about how everything in the plan's process and outcomes is advancing that vision. Our themes on the right-hand side, these are really the roadmap for our process. So think of these as the values. This is our gut check to make sure that both the process and the outcomes are aligned with our vision. So I'll dive more into all of these in just a few minutes. So historical reckoning and trust building, what does that mean, right? It means seeking to understand the legacies of past plans and policies that have harmed communities, namely communities of color in Chicago, and policies that have benefited some communities and have burdened others. It means acknowledging the history of broken relationships and trust between communities and the city in this type of work. We are not starting from a blank slate, and we need to recognize that and repair it in many instances. We need to build off existing work. So there's amazing work that has happened at the neighborhood scale and sometimes even cross neighborhood scale to develop plans for the city, plans for neighborhoods about what you want your community to look like. We need to honor those plans and roll them up into the citywide plan to think about what we can learn from a plan that may have been developed just 5 years ago in your neighborhood all across the city. And then lastly, we recognize that this needs to be part of a broader approach in our year of healing led by the Office of Equity and Racial Justice, which was launched a healing summit in January, and we'll be continuing a series of conversations that aren't just focused narrowly on such topics that will be covered in the plan, but are really thinking about reparative and restorative trust building relationships across neighborhoods and within neighborhoods. Systemic evaluation of equity impacts. This means implementing tools and frameworks such as health and racial equity impact assessment. So really thinking about anything that we're developing in the planning process, how is it lowering the burdens and increasing the benefits for as many communities as possible, particularly those communities that have been chronically disinvested in and marginalized in the history of Chicago. So that those will be helpful ways that we embed this thinking into the way that we do policy making work moving forward in the city. And lastly, on this piece of equity impacts, we need to think about how this plan is encouraging us to root our decisions in an assessment of data around the impacts of by race, ethnicity, gender identity, disability, and other identities. Accessible and meaningful community engagement. This means meeting people where they are. We're implementing an artist organizer model through We Will Chicago that we're incredibly excited about. And what that means is in neighborhoods all throughout the city, we're not going to have your dry run-of-the-mill community meeting, but we're actually, these artists and organizers are going to be helping shape really innovative, creative, engaging ways to bring people into this conversation that maybe had never been asked before about their vision for the future as it relates to any of the topics on the lower left-hand corner. And we know we need to create many different ways for people to engage. So you're here today because you're interested in the official bodies of the advisory group or the research teams, but we also know that we need to meet people where they're at for much less time-intensive ways to engage with the plan. So we're thinking about virtual opportunities to share your thoughts and input, And then neighborhood level events, like I mentioned, pop-up events with many Chicagoans in one place, or meeting people in directly where they are in communities that you can expect to see throughout the course of the summer. Accountability through shared metrics and transparency, you really can't impact what you don't measure. So how do we build a public facing sort of view of where we want, where the city is at on a neighborhood by neighborhood scale on a number of key data metrics that relate to equity and resiliency? And how do we track our progress or lack thereof over time on implementing the things that come from the citywide planning process? We need to make sure that this is transparent, that people can sort of see how their input wound up in the end product of the citywide plan. And as always, with a document as robust as this will be for the future of the city, there will be a meaningful public comment period for folks to shape the input, even if they haven't been involved in the formal advisory bodies. And lastly, I'll just note, sustain interagency and cross collaboration. We recognize that this is an all hands on deck project. We need to break down silos that exist across government agencies, across sister agencies, but also be thinking about this as a cross-sector approach. So how do we weave in those community-based organizations that have been in the trenches doing this hard work for decades? How do we think about the role of the corporate sector and philanthropic sector to really galvanize around this shared vision for Chicago? Because that's how we're going to be successful in implementation together. The left side, I'll just note, and those of you who have already scanned our website will be very familiar with all of these, but the pre-planning outreach landed on these as the major pillars or quality of life drivers that will be key chapters, if you will, within the citywide plan. So many of you are here because you're interested in plugging into a research team and to really build out the recommendations within each of these individual pillars of the plan. Next slide. So what can a plan accomplish? It can accomplish so many things. Again, cities all across the country use this to really guide their development and their policy making. They use citywide plans as an opportunity to reshape their budget priorities, to think about public financing in new and innovative ways. They use these planning processes to create standards for civic and community engagement that live well beyond the plan. We are inspired by all of those pathways, and we're really looking forward to realizing all of the things that you see on this slide through the citywide planning process. Next slide. The governance structure. All right, so on the upper left-hand corner, you see that there's an advisory council. So that's what many of you may be interested in joining. So this is individual residents from all across Chicago, casting a very wide net. You, your neighbors, folks that are interested and invested in the overall planning process. So thinking from a bird's eye view to make sure that all of the pillars are aligned with our themes, that we're really living the values of the plan and everything that we do, both the process and the outcome. And they're making sure that we are doing that meaningful and engaging community engagement throughout the course of the process and not missing any vital perspectives to influence the plan. The Interagency Steering Committee on the right side is more of an internal body to help solve that issue of silos across government departments and agencies and bring us all together around this shared project of the citywide plan. In the lower left-hand corner, you see the role of the research teams. So again, these are the individual groups that are going to be plugging in to the specific pillars of the plan. So if you're very passionate about transit, you want to plug into transportation and you have that sort of interest in that topical area, a research team is a great fit for you to be with like-minded peers, both residents of Chicago, leaders of community-based organization, as well as city and sister agency staff who will be creating those recommendations together. Community partners is an opportunity for organizations to get a step more involved through really being the liaisons between them and their broader constituencies to expand the net of engagement for the plan and also to be active members of the research teams as well. And Kathy will talk more about that in a bit. The other two circles, we have artist organizer partners, which have already been selected. These are pairs that will have clusters of engagement, community events and activities throughout the course of the summer. that are really going to be our go-to team for that neighborhood level presence around We Will Chicago. And lastly, again, there will be virtual opportunities for folks to plug in. If you should decide this is way too much of a time commitment for you, you know that there will be opportunities to engage on social media and on our Bang the Table platform on the web to share your ideas about what the future of climate and resiliency needs to look like for Chicago, what the future of housing and neighborhoods needs to look like for Chicago. And all of this wrapped in a bow to recognize there is a role for the Plan Commission and aldermen to approve of the final citywide plan, which will not happen this calendar year. That's part of the next phase of the plan into 2022 and 2023. Next slide. This is just a call out. So today we're focusing specifically on opportunities for you to engage as a volunteer or a paid community partner. And that is why you're here. So we're excited to dive into your Q&A very shortly.
All right. Thanks, Skylar, for the overview. I'm just going to go through some of the more specifics on the applications. Maybe it'll address some of your questions and then we'll take more. So we are looking for 15 through the application process, volunteers per pillar, and another 15 to be advisory council representatives. And then what you see below are some of the things you might expect during the research meetings. So as you heard, we'll be looking at historical reckoning and trust building, means some research teams will be giving you things to look at. And some of these conversations may be difficult, so we need you to understand that. We have already inventoried 25, the past 25 years worth of plans, including both city and neighborhood plans, and have them categorized by pillar. That will be available for you to, we don't expect you to read all those plans, but there will be basic information, and some of those you may want to go into. So that'll be available to help you have some materials as part of these conversations. We are really looking for a diversity of perspectives, which means that we'll be looking at, diversity of individuals. We will be looking at experiences, which are both, professional and your volunteer. So what you bring to the table may come from a different walk of life than another person. We're looking at a variety of organizations, and we'll also be trying to get a good geographic distribution of individuals across the city. And so, there's a lot of things that you can fill out, but really what we'd like you to think about is, what is it that you're passionate about? As Skylar said, where is it that you really have a lot of thought about something that you're going to bring to the conversation as it pertains to any of the pillars? And there are no minimum qualifications. So again, we're really looking broadly and in a different way than we may have looked typically for an advisory committee or a research team in the past. Next slide. So there are some things we need you to be aware of. We are looking at a monthly meeting, at least 90 minutes. They will be on Zoom. We would want you to prepare for the conversation. So if we provide materials, we would like you to kind of go through those. We already have a trained facilitator. So these will not be managed by city staff, but we have facilitators to be able to make sure that the conversations flow and that everybody has a chance to speak and present their views. But city people will be in attendance, especially we've identified people, as kind of said, interagency. So we'll have those people from other agencies, because we do need the agencies to hear the conversations, and because we may need to follow up on particular aspects of what were brought up during conversations. You should know, because it's city work, that what we do is FOIA, is subject to freedom of information. We will not be recording. We will be recording the research team meetings, but not for public dissemination. However, the advisory committee meetings, we do expect to be public and live stream. So just things you may want to think about. Next slide. So the community partner responsibilities, again, we're looking for volunteers, which are unpaid, and then community partners. And we will be paying stipends or contracts for about $15,000 for the selected community partners. We would, besides participating with whatever knowledge they're already bringing to the table, we would like the community partners to have a back and forth with their constituencies or the groups that they work with, right? So we would like to have The partners host 2 meetings, and just as we're providing stipends, we think it's a good idea for the partners to provide stipends to whoever participates in their meetings. We also are thinking that the community partners themselves, of which there will be 14, it might be good to have a few meetings of them together to discuss how, example, this engagement process is going, or whatever else they deem necessary to discuss. And however a partner uses media, social media or newsletters, or having, I don't know, lunches, whatever the way you do your outreach, we would like you to do that as well through your standard ways. And we will look to you to tell us what that is. Next slide. Selection criteria. So we are going to have a scoring team that will include city staff and others, and we can get into a little more detail on that with questions. We do expect, as we said, to be able to have research teams and an advisory committee that represents all of Chicago. And so we will be looking at those factors again, individuals on race, identity, gender, on geography, on perspectives, on the types of organizations, on experiences. And again, both professional, volunteer, passionate, passion. So we will, you can see here, scores will primarily evaluate, your ability. So we're really looking, and this is, the application has, I think, about 4 open-ended questions, which are short. We only are asking for about a paragraph, for you to really tell us what you're bringing to the table, why you're the right kind of person or the right kind of organization to really help with this initiative. Next slide. And so what makes a strong application? Like I said, you don't really have a lot of space, so short and sweet, and you can look at the questions beforehand and think about it, but really only a paragraph. Again, wide variety of experiences and voices. But we do have a limited number of spots, so about 120 to 140 for all of the research teams, or for all of the volunteers, And then just to note that 14 of those slots will be the community partners. For example, one question we got is, do you have to live in the city to apply? No, but you will have to tell us why what you're bringing to We Will. And that may be because you run a company or for whatever reason, but we will certainly look at those. And so now we would ask you to put your questions in the Q&A box, and we can expand on any of these. Skylar and I will expand on any of these or other questions that you may have.
Okay, so one of our first questions is, can you provide more information about what the research team members will be doing?
Well, for one thing, you'll be attending a meeting every month. So like I said, we'll be looking at, we've got some materials prepared already. We've looked at all the plans. So we will want you to look at those as homework. Again, not to read them all, but to get familiar with the kinds of work that has been done over the last 25 years. We will be having some kind of like getting to know your research team members, where everybody's perspective is coming from. Those are kinds of things we would do in the first meeting or 2. And then we will really be talking about that particular pillar, right? What do we think the future of transportation is, or what is wrong with transportation? We're really having conversations about where we've been, where we are now, and where we would like to go. We are not going to solve things necessarily in this first year, but we want to get a good idea of what are the things that we really need to pay attention to. And I should note that we will also have, besides facilitators, we have research. We will have individuals who are working for us that will be able to follow up on a research question. For example, they're doing this in Baltimore. Why don't we do that? So we can look into those things and bring that information back to the table.
Yeah. The only other thing I'd add, Kathy, is we will have your assigned artist and organizer that's assigned to that specific pillar will be part of the research team too. And that will be a valuable linkage where that person will come to share, hey, we hosted an event just on housing in neighborhoods last week in this neighborhood. Here are some insights that came out of that conversation, to ensure that we have that 2-way sort of stream of communication as we're doing community engagement on topics as well.
And I guess just on that as well, the community partners, we would, depending on when they start having conversations, bringing back what they're hearing to the meetings. And so that we can add that to the conversation.
Great. So Lou, thank you for your comment that you have in the Q&A. I think if we're trying to put it more into a question, it is how will the We Will Chicago process break with Chicago's apartheid history?
Lou, thank you for the question. It is the question of our time. So I appreciate you lifting it up. If I understand it correctly, you're getting at the history, entrenched segregation in Chicago, and unequitable access to investments and opportunities in neighborhoods, particularly communities of color in the city. This is a critical challenge for us to discuss and put on the table during the planning process. So I'm not going to chart out the path of how we'll solve it. How we're thinking about it through the planning lens is we know that past plans and policies have not always included those impacted communities, those impacted most detrimentally at the table as those decisions were being made. And that is what we're seeking to correct in this now We Will planning process by ensuring that the research teams are inclusive and representative of the diversity of Chicago, as well as making sure that we're doing that meaningful and engaging community engagement throughout the whole entire city. So what will matter is the voices that are impacting the plan, and that is one of our driving our principles of how we are shaping diversity, equity, and inclusion through this lens. The only other thing I'll note, I know you had mentioned sort of the harm of race neutral policies in the past. That is the very reason why we want to ground a lot of the planning work in the tool of the health and racial impact assessment. And if that's new terminology or jargon for many of you, I know it was for me when I heard it just a couple months back. What that would mean is you could take any given policy and say, if this was implemented, who would be negatively burdened and who would benefit from this policy? And how do we think about that along lines of race and ethnicity and other intersecting identities, such as gender identity and disability? So I'm bringing that in as a framework that I think is relevant to the nature of your question. Thank you for asking it.
And yeah, I would just add that what Skylar was just talking about is these thinking about, like, we don't know if we're making change if we can't measure it. So right now, we don't measure that. We don't even have a tool to do that. That will be part of the conversation in the research teams, one of many. And what does that look like? And then how do we use that as a tool as we proceed with making decisions in the future?
I just want to get in some of the other questions that are here. So Sean asked, what's the first month for meetings?
July.
So if you're interested in the advisory committee, the first month of meetings will be late June. If you're interested just in the research teams, those will be launching in July.
Okay. We have one question. How will the advisory council members be empowered to impact the plan?
Well, so let's talk about how the advisory committee members are what they're going to kind of do, right? So one of the roles of the advisory committee, there's several roles actually. One is starting with, we have 3 co-chairs already selected and helping us as we proceed with the next phases, but also they're the place where we really want what's happening in each of the research teams to sort of be looked at as a whole. Now, that doesn't mean the advisory committee meeting members are going to go to every meeting or have to, review every work product from the research teams. But the idea is that they're really thinking about how something that's happening in housing is impacted by something that may be happening in transportation. And in that way, making sure, again, that one thing isn't negative to another, one action isn't negative to another. So that's one of the main roles of the advisory committee, is just to making sure that we don't continue to isolate these pillars, but that we're integrating the pillars. I don't know, Skylar, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, the only thing I just mentioned is we're going to create these sort of streams of two-way learning and sharing out across the group so that they're speaking with one another. Still figuring out if that looks like a monthly share out or more of sort of a convening of the different groups to come together partway through the process. That will be one way that the advisory committee can think about the evolution of the entire plan as it's moving forward. And then just tactically, I'll mention towards the end of the process, the advisory committee, like all the research teams, will have an opportunity to look at the draft recommendations that are coming out and have an opportunity to like really get in the weeds and start providing line item recommendations on the things that are emerging.
Will the research team members be doing any actual research or just providing input?
Well, we certainly are welcome for the research team members to do research, but again, we will also have some consultant assistant in case, you know, and this is not anybody's full-time job, but ours kind of. So they certainly can bring that to the table, and we would welcome that because we are looking for all kinds of ideas. And, you know, we know that people have policy ideas out there already. So totally bring whatever to the table.
From Annie asked, do you have any guidance for how groups should consider spending the money that they might receive? Can it go to most anything, staffing, events, etc.? Anything specific it can't be used on?
I will have to figure out the anything specific it can't be used on. I'm sure there's certain things, but again, I mean, there are some requirements that we have someone from the community partner be a consistent member of the research team. But the way, I think the real flexibility comes in the way that the community partner works with their constituency or their group of members. That is, we're not dictating that. We want to hear how you get information, and we'd like to see how you get information back and forth from your groups and bring it to the table. But I would think that there'd be many ways that people would do that.
Great. Carson asks, I work for a community-based organization that has a neighborhood plan published in 2018. We plan to apply as a community partner, but if we aren't selected, how can we stay involved in the process to ensure our plan's priorities and recommendations are filtered into We Will Chicago?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm happy to take a first cut. Maybe Kathy, you can add.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just first want to thank you for that past work that you've done to build out a plan within your community. That's amazing. And those have those hyper local recommendations that are really going to drive development if they're implemented well. And if there's an authentic community engagement process that drives the recommendation. So thank you for that past work. We know that there's a limited amount of spots available for some of these positions. So we do want to build on the past efforts that you all have already led. One of the ways that we're thinking about that is the research teams will pull up as they're doing their initial stage. They're going to look at all of the past plans that have been developed and develop some of, like, think about some of the lessons learned that emerge on the page to build on your great work. The other piece of it is this isn't the only opportunity for you to get involved if you aren't selected. So there will be community engagement opportunities throughout the course of the plan. If you should want to, you know, host your own conversation that pertains to We Will Chicago, we'll have sort of meeting toolkits that we develop. And then as the plan is developed, you know, and a draft report is available, you know, the voices of your constituents and your CBO are just as valued as so many across the city to provide us with your perspective, being an on-the-ground practitioner around the challenges that have come about in implementing your plan. We want to learn from you and hear from you in this process. Anything you'd add, Kathy?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and if you recall something that slide Skylar showed earlier, one of the policy issues that we want to address is exactly kind of what you're asking. Not so much like your plan today, but maybe that one is, how do we integrate plans that are not done by the city, by local communities into both what we're talking about now, but as a process in the future? We don't have that process right now. The organizations do those plans, and how the city implements them, that's kind of like I don't know, it's a black box at best. So that is one of the kind of policy discussions we want, and we will want to make sure that we do have representation from organizations that do that kind of work, less so to talk about their specifics and more so to talk about, so how is this a process that we really incorporate into the future? How do we have those local plans incorporated into city plans and vice versa?
Great. In what ways, or this is from Kyoko, in what ways or what committee areas will be most responsible for reaching out to and communicating with community residents who are skeptical or suspicious about the opportunity for change in the city intent?
I'm going to say that's probably everybody. I'm sure there's people all over that feel that way, some more than others. But I think your question was what committee is going to be doing that? I think that's kind of a shared, I would say a shared responsibility. Skylar?
Yeah, no, I'll just note that the artist organizer team being led by Honeypot Performance has been thinking a lot around this, sort of how do we recognize and honor and value the work that has already happened in community and the broken trust and relationships. And we're really looking forward to leaning into their expertise to think about what does that mean for how we start to ground some of these other conversations that will happen throughout the course of the plan into the summer. To ensure that we have that consistency. We know that some people just will choose to not engage. And we hope that, you know, for those that do decide to opt in to attend an event or provide feedback in a virtual setting, that they, you know, they see that as a meaningful opportunity enough that they encourage their peers to do so. And that's how we can build trust over time, knowing that we have to grapple with the ways in which this has not people have been asked for their opinions a lot, and and oftentimes hasn't been felt as though the city has listened. And we need to name that at every turn as we're developing this process.
Jackie just has a question about how can we be confident in diversity when you know, this group here does not appear to represent diversity. I would like to say I am of Mexican descent, just for background as well. But Skylar, do you want to?
Yeah, happy. Jackie, thank you so much for that question. Thank you for naming it. It is incredibly important and something that we're thinking so hard about in this process. I want to recognize that you're seeing a small cross section of this overall planning team that are facilitating this event today. Our internal operations does more closely reflect the diversity in Chicago. And as we were thinking about selections for the advisory committee co-chairs and the lead staff department and sister agency person, that lens of diversity and equity was part of that process. So as you'll see, if you are selected and become involved, you will be with peers for which you know, again, it does represent the diversity of Chicago. But again, appreciate that question and appreciate the observation too.
Jenny is asking, what is the goal of the research team and what will come of the discussion at these monthly meetings?
So I think this is a good point to say that we are looking at applications for this year, but it is quite possible that we might extend all aspects of this into into 2022. But what is the expectation? The expectation at the end of this year is, I think I may have said this, to really get an idea of what it is, like what ideas of what the vision should be, ideas of how we should, what each of those pillars should look like in the future. But not necessarily solve any of or detail how we're going to get there. That we will have to continue that conversation into 2022. But it's sort of like, what are the consensus things? What are the ideas we should look at? We want to get that out in some sort of you know, report. Let's just say we want to get it written down. As Skylar said, people are going to be able to review this stuff at different times throughout the year. But you know, getting this shared vision and these shared goals and objectives and ways that we're going to meet them. And then knowing that this is just the beginning, there's going to be a lot of work to you know, really, how do we exactly get there?
Great. Another question is, will participatory budgeting be considered in the plan? Will the funding of the development projects from the plan be determined by participatory budgeting or get Gridlock and City Council? I think Kathy, you might want to go a little bit more into what type of plan this is.
Right. So this is more of a policy plan. I think the issue of participatory budgeting will be discussed. And again, I go back to a slide that Skylar showed earlier, which is one of the things that this policy plan wants to look at is how do we budget? How do we align the goals? And we don't have a citywide plan, so we are not budgeting against that vision. The great goal for us is to figure out a way to do that. And if participatory budgeting is one way to achieve that, well, I'm sure we'll discuss it. So there are no answers at this moment. We can't tell you this is what we're going to actually do, but that's the kind of conversation, the kind of question, and the kind of process that we need to talk about and these research teams.
CJ is asking, when must the money be spent? Is there a deadline?
So if we're talking about the work this year, we're not, so just to be clear, we're not talking about money to be spent on any particular projects. That's not what we're talking about. So we are talking about a contract for this year that ends in December. If this is related to the community partners, that's what we're talking about. That is a scope of work for, well, I'm going to say July 1st to the end of the year. And if we continue into next year, then we will create new contracts and address it at that time.
Other question is, how many partner agencies can be involved in the process, assuming someone is funded?
Partner agencies.
Community partners.
Community partners. Well, right now
Yeah.
we have 14. We have stipends for 14. And I'm just going to say, we had a question last night, which is, can you do a coalition? And we think that's a pretty good idea. And so, there could be a community partner, could be a coalition of organizations. They would need to figure out who the applicant is and how they're going to share the funding, but that is an option. But we are limited with 14 positions or community partners right now.
Yeah, and just to clarify, so the community partners, again, is that paid stipended position. But if you're a community-based organization and you're interested in volunteering of your time, there's more opportunities for that than there are for the paid stipended community partner roles.
Jeremy asked, how many people will be on each research team and who will facilitate each team?
So we're looking for 15. We're looking for 15 from the application process and probably like 13 volunteers and 2 of the community partners. There will probably be another 5 people because we will have someone from a city agency. The artist organizer team member will participate. Probably some of the core team will participate. So probably a group of not more than 20, but from the applications, we're looking for 15 for each.
Oh, and then facilitation. Kathy.
Oh yeah, facilitation. We have professional facilitators who will be doing that work.
Someone asked, can you explain more about what you mean by policy plan? Is this a land use plan, a development plan? How do you anticipate the plan being used? I think that's a good question.
Yeah, it is. And it's not a land use plan or a development plan. So a development plan would be something like maybe a master plan for a really large area, and more like a planned development. That's kind of more like a master plan. You're really figuring out what the height of buildings are, where they go, where the streets go. This is not that. It is not a land use plan because we're not going to, especially this year, go through the whole city and to say this should be commercial and this should be residential. It's more setting up the goals and the metrics and the ideas for how we should do any of those things, right? So it's like, what are we trying to achieve by any master plan or by any land use plan? Well, first you have to have a vision. First you have to know, like, how are we including equity and resiliency? How do you measure those things? That's the kind of work that we'll be doing at this stage. We will not be looking at specifics. Because we did hear a lot in the beginning, and I've said this before, people want to know how they can impact the decisions. They don't want to just say, they don't want to go, here's a decision that the city has made, and now I have to react to it. So we're trying to set those processes, those metrics, those goals now. And again, we're going to come up with those. And even next year, we may not have them all worked out, but it's kind of changing the process of the way we work.
Yeah, maybe another analogy is instead of diving into like this specific thing should happen at this site, we really want to take the step back and think about those broad quality of life pillars for neighborhoods throughout Chicago. Where do we want to be on housing and neighborhood development? Where do we want to be on transportation and infrastructure? And when we can have those hard, strategic conversations about the future of the city and our neighborhoods, it will then guide what Kathy is talking about, those much more granular decisions about specific projects and developments over time.
Thank you, Skylar. Is an outside consultant being used for creation of the plan or city staff alone?
Both. So we will provide details on that information as soon as we're finished with that, but we can get you the consultant team. So again, we're having consultant teams doing facilitation. We're having consultant teams help with the research and the writing, but we are not like hiring this job out to a big consulting firm to create a plan for the city of Chicago. It is very much a plan of the city staff, consultants, expertise and input, and yours, right? So yeah.
And I just want to note, I think there's often a dynamic that is felt in community from my experience of, you give ideas, someone else goes and creates a glossy product, and you don't feel like it speaks to the nature of the conversation. And that is something that in our norms with the consultant team, it's very clear that what they are producing should be reflective of the conversations as they are emerging. And there's an opportunity for a feedback mechanism for the research team itself to see where things are landing, to gut check, to make sure that it's reflective of the conversations. So that those are an ethos we'll bring to this process as well, to acknowledge that longstanding dynamic that has happened in communities.
The question from Katia, do you have any estimated budget that the city will commit to executing this citywide plan?
Not at this point, no, because we don't know what it is. For one thing, we don't have the answers. And I think that whole issue of budgeting is what, again, processes that we want to influence and decide, what should we be thinking about when we're budgeting? What are we measuring against?
Yeah, we haven't talked much so far in this information session about what future phases will look like, but just to paint the picture of, the next 3 to 5 years, what most cities do is when they launch a plan, they set up an implementation body that would meet on a regular cadence to evaluate the progress or lack thereof on specific priorities that came out of the plan. And that can happen regardless of immediate sort of fiscal change and money to specific priorities. We recognize that both are vitally important, but just wanted to give you a sense of we know that accountability mechanism needs to be created before the plan is launched in order for it to be successful.
Great. Sean asked, what's the relationship between this effort and the city's climate action plan?
Well, I would say the city's climate action plan is one of those 25 plans that have been done over the last, one of those plans, there's way more than 25 that have been done over the last 25 years that we need to look at, reference. What about that still is good, or it still is true? Well, climate is happening, so we know that's true. But those are the kinds of documents that we have in the list of plans that we need to inform our, we need to get familiar with and understand.
Okay. This is kind of similar to the previous question, but will the plan have any binding power over future city policy and budgets?
A great question. I mean, I think we are all in this because we don't want to create a plan that sits on the shelf and nothing ever happens with it. I think there's a lot we need to learn from what other cities have done to make it a document that does have teeth. And that's something that we're committed to doing throughout the course of it. There's examples in other places where every single council action item, there is a justification where it needs to tie back to a specific priority within the citywide plan. As we think about how we might give it teeth, those are ideas that we'll explore throughout the course of the planning process. Really appreciate the question.
And I would just add to that, that we will be bringing our updates. So like at the end of the year, when we have our basic ideas, both to the Plan Commission and to City Council. So, and our department is updating, has already had one update meeting with the aldermen. So we need to let everyone needs to participate. So that will be something we'll be doing throughout the course of this work. Not just like, here, everybody, here's a plan, we want you to adopt it. Everyone needs to go through this process.
And I think this was a good question, just so everyone can see it. I think Jackie asked if they can be engaged in more than one pillar.
Yes, I'm just going to say we specifically did not let people choose several pillars on one application. But if your organization, or if you want to, you could fill out more than one application. You just have to specify why this pillar this would be appropriate pillar for you, and this one as well. But
Yeah,
you certainly can do that.
it's definitely an opportunity, but one thing I'll just note is, we want to make sure that we're casting a very wide net in terms of perspectives and voices at the table. And because there's so few opportunities to engage, we may be more inclined, if you should be selected, to slot you into just one of those teams. That doesn't mean you wouldn't have the opportunity to shape other teams throughout the course of the process. We mentioned these ideas of sort of convenings or cross collaboration moments across pillar teams. Which are ways that you could engage, but maybe in a less time intensive way on another pillar research team.
I think Megan asked us a question earlier. I don't know if we answered live. Does a community partner need to be a 501c3? Does
not need to be a 501c3, but there will need to be some sort of fiscal agent. So you don't, if you're a block club, and perfectly fine, or a bunch of block clubs, which are usually not 501c3s, we would need to have someone be your fiscal agent, like maybe it's your local chamber of commerce or something, and they can apply as well. But contracting wise, we will need to work with a fiscal agent.
Amanda asked, are there any paid job opportunities with We Will Chicago?
Staff positions, not at this time, no.
So the only paid opportunities, just to clarify, are the community partner program at this moment.
Yeah, yes, and I would just say, so we have put out requests for proposals to pre-approve city contractors, so that is the case. But outside of those two ways, not at this time.
I think Susan has a question. How do you plan to get aldermanic buy-in when the time comes?
Well, we are going to be working with the aldermen all throughout the process. And we are, we've also asked the aldermen to distribute the applications through their network. So just like with all individuals, people need to be respected, and they need to be made aware of and things need to be discussed with them.
I think Pamela just had a comment about, looking at the pillars, people may not want to limit themselves to one pillars. So Kathy, do you want to talk a little bit about how there's going to be greater engagement besides these specific teams on our website and elsewhere?
Yeah, and first of all, I'm glad that people are so excited they want to be in more than one pillar. That is wonderful. Yes, like Skylar said, we'll have the artist organizers who are also going to be working by pillar. So that's where they go and what they're doing is a place to engage, and they will have activities. We will be I think we'll be developing activities that people may be able to use on their own in their community. And we will provide, I think we're talking about little toolkits for that. We're providing similar things for the aldermen. And of course, the website will have activities, we envision, we don't have these developed now, but sort of mapping exercises or different ways to put input into the ideas that are coming out from the We Will. We have a lot of ways to develop those kinds of things, and open to ideas.
Yeah, but just to really appreciate the question. When we do any sort of community engagement, we can't approach it in a siloed way and only talk about housing and neighborhood development. All of these issues are interconnected with each other. And that means that, as we're doing engagement, an idea related to an idea related to lifelong education may emerge, and we need to have a way of making sure that that team also receives that feedback and idea that is coming out from the process too. So we're thinking about it in a dynamic way that is avoiding silos, but really appreciate the call out.
And I just think that's an interesting one you mentioned, because lifelong learning, which is one of the pillars, actually came from that. It was something that was gleaned from the other 6 pillars. So because, you know, it's not just about elementary school or high school, it's about cradle to grave kind of educating. And we heard a lot of that when we were talking about the other pillars. So that is that kind of getting that crossover, it will be very important.
I'm not sure if we can answer this right now, but or who the correct party would be, but can we get a list of pre-approved city contractors?
Yes, that stuff, we can put that, I don't know right now in the chat, but that is all available on the city's website. I just can't give you that link right now. And there are numerous ones, but sure, that is absolutely available.
Great. I don't see any additional specific questions coming in yet. So,
Gabby, I see something about letters of support.
oh, is that farther back?
I don't know where it is. It just popped up on my screen. But yes, you can put in, we answered that the other day. Yeah, you can do letters of support, not required, but you can certainly submit letters of support. I don't know if we need to say anything else about that.
You mean for volunteers, it's not required, but for the community partners, it is required, correct?
So do you want to say, didn't we clarify something, Jamie, the other day about where those go?
Yeah, so just to echo what Gabby said, for our volunteer applications for the research teams or the advisory committee, you do not need a letter of support. For our community partner applications, we are requesting at least 1 and up to 3 letters of support. They can be submitted using the form that we have online. There's a form there to submit docs or PDFs or the format it indicates. You can also submit those letters of support. That's how we prefer to get it. But if you have a problem with the form submitting that way, you can email wewill at cityofchicago.org. And I'll put that in the chat.
And yesterday we got a question of like, who would be a good person to write my letter of support? That is really up to you. It could be an individual, it could be your neighbor, it could be an organization that you work really closely with, some sort of individual or org that can really complement and be your cheerleader around the value that you would bring to the planning process. Maybe your interest in a specific pillar, or can attest to your ability to like speak passionately about the topic at hand that you should be applying to become involved in. So we're not thinking about it rigidly. It's really up to you to think about the best author for that simple, short letter of support.
There was another question that came earlier about letters of support. I forgot who it was, apologize, but you were wondering, you were applying as a coalition of organizations, and was wondering if one of the letters of support could come from the organization or from not a subsidiary, but from a participant and underneath one of the organizations. And we'd prefer that these letters of support come from outside and are not directly from people that could be impacted by getting this application. Someone from the community who knows your work and can speak to your expertise and willingness to be in the program.
CJ asked, is there any kind of fiscal match to apply for funding?
No.
Bruce, I'm not sure exactly what your question is about the pre-approved vendors. If you want to email wewill@cityofchicago.org, we can follow up with you on that, just so that we can answer exactly what you're looking for. Lou asked, is CBAs on the table as a plan recommendation?
CV.
Yeah, community benefit agreement.
Oh, see, I was reading CV.
Yeah. Lou, I'll
Okay.
just add, I think these are the types of ideas that we as the Department of Planning and Development and the Mayor's Office are not at this point scripting to say this will or will not be included in the
Right.
plan. We're creating the container for these type of recommendations to be talked about amongst the research team and amongst the advisory committee. And then a means by which the public can also provide feedback and input on those ideas as well. So thank you for the insight. And then I know we got another, oh, go for it.
Go ahead. There's a question, will research team meetings take place during the evenings?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we got this question yesterday as well. And as Skylar noted yesterday, there is a question that asks when would you prefer to meet? But we certainly expect that there would be meetings in the evening. Unless everybody wants to meet at lunchtime, and then that's what we'll do.
Yeah, so we'll look at based on who is selected for the research team, we'll look at the general patterns of responses for preference for meeting during the day or in the evening. And then we'll report back to you if here's where the group landed. If for whatever reason you have a personal conflict that's going to prevent you from being engaged in that way, we'll talk about it with you one-on-one when we get to that point.
We are just at 1 o'clock right now, so we really appreciate everyone, or almost maybe 30 seconds away, everyone's time today. Again, if you have any more additional questions, you can please send them to wewill@cityofchicago.org, and we will get back to you. But we really appreciate your time this afternoon.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your interest. Hope to engage with you virtually and in person at some point throughout the course of this planning process. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks. I hope we answered most of your questions. But again, you can always email us.
Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.